This is Eric Olsen's video final homework for Physics 271. This is on diffraction. So, first to explain what diffraction is, just as like sound bends around a corner and you can hear things out of sight, so too does light, and for that matter, all other types of waves. Diffraction is like the adding up of all types of waves as they bend around things. So, for example, here's a picture of water waves as they move first like horizontally, linearly. And I touched up the picture a little bit. These black lines and that around there aren't like that. So originally they move linearly, but as they pass through this small opening relative to their wavelength, then they open up like circular, and they move in like a circular fashion. So diffraction allows waves to both bend around obstacles as well as propagate through small openings. So if you put it simply enough, the combination of interference patterns of a small number of waves magnified to the entire propagation of the source adds up to diffraction. So here's a GIF that I've got explaining a little bit of what that is. So as the waves move linearly, as I pass through this small thing, they start propagating in every direction. An important facet to consider with this slit width is that it needs to be relative to the wavelength. They need to be pretty small compared to the wavelength so that this doesn't happen. What happens here is that because the slit width is pretty large relative to the total wavelength, you can see that most of the wave is still able to go through just linearly. You can see that there's still some diffractive effects panning to the top and bottom, but overall, mostly it's negligible. So if you can analyze this using what's called Huygens principle, every point of the wave is a source of propagating wavelets. So every part along this wave, at every single point, once it's given a chance outside the slit, it'll start to propagate. And then you can basically this GIF is getting at that this is only one wave propagation point. Fundamentally, this is exactly like interference, where the amplitudes of either wave add up constructively or destructively cancel each other out. Diffraction involves a continuous distribution of wavelets adding up. So what this makes a difference is when you're talking about multiple slits, which I'll get into in just a sec. But like to start with single slit diffraction, you can look at, let's see, for single slit diffraction, it's important to get an understanding of what this means. So this is a picture. Oh, that's about the previous thing. Here we go. So for single slit diffraction, you would assume this with geometric optics. Your idea would be, oh, light passed through the slit, and you see that like that size of the light is out the other end. That's not what happens. Here, you see that light passes through the slit, and there's an interference pattern above and below, which is like the fringe pattern, where the constructive interference adds up the intensities here. They destructively deny each other for that space right there, right above it, and below it. And then they add up again, but then they lose intensity as you go further down. This is due to the superposition of waves, which is a property that you can talk about, like for mechanical waves, all sorts of waves. But primarily right here, we're talking about light. So because of this property of waves, the constructive interference of the propagations. And this is continued from the previous video where I just screwed up for a second. So this is single slit interference. So what you see here is that as light passes through and hits this little slit, all the wavelets will propagate out. So it's like at this time you can imagine that the wave is at the bottom, it's at a trough up here, it's at a crest, so it's going up and down, like that. You can see that they add up in the middle with the highest intensity, and then they propagate. Like there's a fringe where it's at the lowest point where they destructively cancel each other out, and then here where they constructively add up. So this is like the similar fringe pattern that we see, and then here's a graph showing what the intensity is like going throughout it. So if you compare this with more slits for multiple slit diffraction, well, here's just another thing talking about single slit diffraction, where the wave basically it distributes itself like that. So multiple slit diffraction, instead of spaces where the waves destructively cancel each other out across the region, it's inside the envelope. It goes as a continuum created from the initial maxima right here as it loses intensity as it goes up and down and up and down. This creates like the fuzzy it's almost like an interference pattern, but it's not really because it's a combination of an infinite number of wavelets. And then as you see, once you add more slits, this is 5 slits, there's still 5 peaks as you can see, but like the intensity is kept to like a smaller area. It's sharper, and that's what's it's being caused that because there's more wavelets propagating together, so that they constructively add up at smaller points and they destructively deny each other at other points. And you can also see that there's tiny factors here. With fewer slits, these will be a little bit more pronounced, but since we got 5 slits, which is a pretty high number, they're pretty small. They're almost negligible. So moving on to some real-world examples of diffraction. So here we got like sound moving around a door. So diffraction. Let's assume diffraction doesn't happen. So there's a rock concert and it's propagating outwards with that music, and there's this guy trying to sleep. So if diffraction doesn't exist, the waves will geometrically keep going forward and no one will hear them. So this guy is able to sleep. So what does actually happen is like the rock concert's playing, it moves outwards, then they bend around the door and out, and this guy is unable to sleep. For the second example, I will direct you to the textbook itself, which does a pretty good job of showing an example right here. So if you took a photograph of this razor blade, you'd see on the edge that there's a destructive interference pattern going out across. This is because the diffraction of the waves adds up and constructively and destructively denies each other. One reason that you won't see this regularly, like in real life, is because, like I said with this example, going back to, where is it? Yeah, here we go. Actually, this one will probably be better. As you can see here, when there's a small enough box comparative to like the wavelength, you see like a circular distribution. So like that's like sound waves. Like if you imagine these are sound waves propagating forward and then they bend around, just like the rock concert. If you had a big enough door, on the other hand, they're not really going to be able to bend that much. So if you had like a huge like auditorium, like let's say like you're at like an aquarium shooting, like not an aquarium, if you're at a huge concert hall and you had gigantic doors out, if you're standing to the side of the door, it would be a lot harder to hear the sound because the intensity is out. Because you can see like there's faint showing that it's bending, but not too much. This with light, because you're talking about such small wavelengths, you need a really small slit for it to bend whatsoever. And honestly, our eyes just are not that adept at picking that up. So, in summary, diffraction is the constructive add-up of wavelets. Overall, when you talk about more and more wavelets, or more and more points of propagation, you get a higher intensity at each of like the points, and they all will still like be bounded by the single slit interference pattern that you would expect to see due to fringe, like as like the waves constructively add up and deny each other. Alright, that's it.